beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, rocking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. Be free. ages. The North Star caught the red hot light. She saw the dogs. She saw the death. She saw the new day. She saw the North Star. She heard the song. She sang the song. She was the song. Go down, go down, go down, Moses, go down, let my, go down, let my. Break down the walls of blood, break down the walls of blood. Tell old Pharaoh, break down the walls of blood, break down the walls of blood. Break down the walls of blood. Break down the walls of blood. Let my. Take the hands of the people. Move it with the North Star. Let my people go. Past the chains. Past the fields of blood. Past the houses of mangled souls, past the broken back children. Past the history of twisted cathedrals, pray into insidious gods, for more lives, more darkness, more arms and body parts to run the foul-smelling ship of laws, Constitution and rights. To the North Star! To the North Star! To the North Star! To the North Star! Let my to the North Star! People go to the North Star! To the North Star! Let my to the North Star. To the North Star. For all that is good, for all that is free. To the North Star. To the North Star. Beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night, she reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood so deep. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons and courts. breaking and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time. Shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny, of a people, with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood.
And welcome to our special 11 a.m. WPFW tribute to our hometown hero, as he's being called today, GASTON NEAL. This is part of our day-long Memorial Day special, tribute to heroes. Later on in the day, we're going to be hearing about Tina Turner, but right now we're spending the hour with three wonderful poets talking about GASTON NEAL. I'm just going to read a little something from a little book of the poetry of GASTON NEAL, a sampler. During the turbulent 1960s, most major cities had a singularly influential Black Power protest writer. Chicago had Don E. Lee, later became Haki Mayabuti. Newark had Leroy Jones, who became Amiri Baraka. And Detroit had Dudley Randall. Washington had GASTON NEAL. We're going to be spending the hour with GASTON NEAL. I am very honored to have three wonderful poets who knew GASTON NEAL very well. Kenny Carroll. Kenny Carroll, for many years, was a host on this radio station with 2K Nation, and he'll be introducing us to GASTON as well. And then we have Brian Gilmore, and I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves or have Kenny introduce you. And last but not least, we have Peter Harris, and I must say it is because of GASTON NEAL that I've been on the radio for 31 years. When I first came here from Pittsburgh, which was Gaston's hometown, he introduced me to WPFW. So with that said, Kenny Carroll.
All right. Thank you, Joni, for having us. And I love that PFW does these memorial celebrations because we forget that part of Memorial Day is to celebrate not just the kind of the typical imperialist celebration of Memorial Day, but the celebration of all people who fight against oppression in the world. And certainly GASTON NEAL was one of those people. And so just a little bit about Gaston off the top of my head. He's a Pittsburgh native. Gaston was a part of several significant radical movements, both social and civil rights movements and literary arts movements. And specifically, we can talk about his work and his significance in the Black arts movement, which, runs from the death of Malcolm X into the 70s. And we can talk about his participation in radical Black organizations, his work with people like Stokely Carmichael, his work around the country and working in communities to help communities fight off oppression. And I celebrate Gaston for also the additional work he did in the city around the health and welfare of people in the city, especially the most marginalized people. And I celebrate Gaston through the words of people like August Wilson, who talked about Gaston's oversized influence on him as a writer and an artist when he was coming up in Pittsburgh. August, when I first met him at the Pittsburgh at AWP in Pittsburgh, he talked about following Gaston and Rob Penny around and wanting to be a poet like them and writing really bad, mimicry of European poets. But he said it was very important that there was a space, that people like Gaston made a space for young artists. And then I talk about Amiri Baraka, one of my mentors, who really, and it's interesting, this is how I met Amiri Baraka and GASTON NEAL, and I always used to tell him this story. We were at a jazz club, Woody's Hilltop on Georgia Avenue, Baraka was performing with Nina Simone. Nina Simone didn't show up, but I'm sitting at the bar, and I'm just sitting there ear hustling, listening to Baraka's conversation, and Gaston says, "Hey, man, do you know Amiri?" And I didn't even know Gaston, and he introduced me to Amiri, and we became lifelong friends. And I was telling, Peter before we came in, Gaston also was one of the first instructors for the DC Writers Corps. When we started, he came in and worked with the writers who were going to go out to the communities and work in the communities and produce art. One of the things that Gaston left us with was this saying. Gaston used to say, we miss 99% of all poetry in the world because we think it's supposed to be in a specific form. And so he admonished the writers to, find the poetry that comes naturally from the people before you think that it belongs into some encapsulated form. So that's Gaston Neal in a nutshell for me. And we'll swing it to...
let me just say something. So I'm going to ask Brian to go next. And
okay.
Gaston has some very important achievements and things we remember him by. And one is the New School of Afro-American Thought. I'm going to ask Brian to talk about that. But let me just say a little bit more about Pittsburgh, where Gaston grew up. He grew up in the Hill District, which some people may know is the home of many and very important jazz folks. Gaston grew up in poverty. His dad passed when he was just 10 years old. He moved to D.C. in the 50s and, of course, stayed there until his transition in the late, I think it was 99. But I'm just going to read a quote from James Early, who is another member of the PFW family. Full of history, music, struggle, love, and achievement, Gaston Neal is a memory voice heard in the present, speaking the future. So that's absolutely true. He's heard in the present and he's speaking the future. So with that, let's welcome on Brian Gilmore. And Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself as a poet before you jump into sharing with us about Gaston.
Okay, thank you very much. And Brian Gilmore, native Washingtonian, Northeast crew, and been a poet for about 30 years, I guess. In this town with a public school, and then I went to the great Archbishop Carroll High School. Graduate of the UDC Law School as well. Very proud of that. So, but my life has been in this city. I love this city, and even though it's the colony, I still love it.
And Brian was also part of our Sonia Sanchez tribute last fall. So,
and thank you with that too. So I met Gaston probably a little bit after I became a poet. Just arbitrarily met him through Kenneth Carroll and became a mentor to me, a great friend, and appreciated the work he was doing, very committed individual. So before I talk about the New School, let me read a little bit about what Gaston said about himself from a book called The Black Power Revolt from 1967. He has a poem in there, but his bio, he wrote himself, he says, dead born 1934, reborn 61 with the knowledge of the beauty of my blackness, the unfailing destiny of my people and me. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Penn, Black Hill District, my philosophy after I destroyed the whiteness or most of it, for I believe somewhere in me there is still some hiding. However, I will not rest until I'm purged and linked completely with my brothers in the struggle to destroy and rebuild a black nation. Right now, my philosophy is simple: discipline for unity, unity for a nation, discipline for unity. He also says, right now, this is in 67, right now my life is involved in the New School of Afro-American Thought. I am the cultural director and am editing a volume of poetry of my time spent in St. Elizabeth Hospital. So to give a few notes about Gaston and the New School of Afro-American Thought, before that, Gaston was a poet before that, probably back until the 50s, because he is at the famous reading at Howard University of the Beat Poets who came down. Mary Baraka, A.B. Spellman, and Gaston came down from New York City, and Greg Corso was there, Allen Ginsberg was there, Ray Bessemer was there, and they read at Howard University. It was kind of like a really big deal, especially on the campus of Howard University. And then, of course, Baraka writes this famous poem called One Night Stand, which is pretty hilarious if you read it, because he's trashing Howard with his metaphors and codes. So Gaston was reading poetry at least by the 60s, because Julius Hobson organized a reading in 1964, a really big deal, and Gaston was on that.
Right.
And that was 1964. That was called Four Acts for Act at WST. I know us old school DC heads know WST. You couldn't even miss it when you were traveling uptown.
Right.
So, but him and Don Freeman did form the New School of Afro-American Thought in 65, and then they started programming in 66, 67. They did a famous launch in October 1966 at their storefront down there. This was in the 14th Street corridor, probably right near where all the action is, right near the Reeves Center, right near all of that now. And so Mary Baraka read at that reading. Larry Neal, Sterling Brown, Owen Dodson, A.B. Spellman, all read at that reading. It was called 3 Days of Soul. Gaston and Don Freeman were able to bring in 20 music acts over 3 days. Really big deal to launch the new school. But the new school was a school where people took classes and came down and took classes.
Right.
And they would regularly take classes. I mean, Gaston's whole philosophy was you kind of like had to reprogram yourself, remake yourself. So instead of me talking about all the programming they did, they also did a tribute to Langston Hughes when Langston Hughes died in 1967. Instead of me talking about all those details, there is a film on YouTube called Under the Radar. And if you do the search on YouTube, you will see the film about the new school. It's about 45 minutes. Don Freeman is talking on there, and some of the students who were in that are talking on about how the new school operated and everything like that. I know the new school lasted at least until like the early 70s, and then Gaston famously returns to the city from his travels.
Right.
And says, you know, the school is no more, and there were too many cooks in the kitchen. I remember that famous quote.
Right.
He said there were too many chefs in the kitchen or something like that.
And I think the SNCC Legacy Project perhaps has captured some of that of Gaston.
Yep. And also Drum and Spear and Drum and Spear Bookstore and New School were intimately connected at the same time. But I would recommend watching that film. I've watched it because I'm doing all this research for this book I'm writing. I've watched it like 3 or 4 times. But the students, it'd be great for people to hear from the students, because then they can hear more about the programming that Gaston and Don Freeman were doing.
Okay, you're listening to a special tribute to our hometown hero, Gaston Neal, with 3 poets, Kenny Carroll, 3 native Washingtonian poets, Kenny Carroll, Brian Gilmore, and Peter Harris, and this is Joni. And as you're talking, Brian, I'm remembering all these stories. I'll just tell one quick one. Gaston was, of course, very much a part of the WPFW family, very close to Tom Porter. That's how I met Tom Porter, was through Gaston Neal. But one of the great stories is that none other than Gaston Neal, Knapp, don't forget the Blues Turner, and Roach Brown. You know this story, Kenny?
No.
They were Roach Brown. You can hear him tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Yes, indeed.
The 3 of them were where? Guess what? At St. E's. And guess what they did? They were supposed to, instead of being locked up in the D.C. jail, they were sent to St. E's, and it is there that all 3 of them learned theater. And they all 3, Gaston, Roach Brown, and Knapp Turner, are thankful for that time that they had together in St. E's to craft their art of poetry. And that's just one story.
Right.
and I'm remembering a lot of stories. One about Marion Barry and Nina Simone.
So they were all 3 were admitted?
Yes, they were all 3 together in St. E's for quite a while. it was probably at least a year. I'll ask Roach, but Roach still talks about it, and Knapp talked about it fondly. And Nat Turner was a wonderful, in addition to being a lot of things, but he was also an actor and a poet.
And he starred in the August Wilson piece here at the Woolly Mammoth Theater. Nat Turner played in
the piano.
No, the other blues joint they just made into a movie.
Okay, and
Joe Turner is coming on.
And
not Bessie Smith. Not Bessie.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Right.
Yeah. Nat Turner on the bass.
That's Chadwick's last performance.
Right.
Yeah.
As far as the movie, right. Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are some listeners out there who do not know August Wilson. So check him out. It's a very, very important, probably the most important playwright, if you could say, of the last century. He's a play coming out in a couple weeks right here in the area. Mm-hmm. But again, August Wilson thanked Gaston NEAL for inspiring him to be a poet. Mm-hmm. So I guess we can jump in with a couple of poems. Well, let me just, I'm sorry, I have going to make this quick because you mentioned Nina Simone and Brian. I know you have a poem about Marion Barry. Marion Barry and Gaston NEAL had a very close and positive relationship. It was because of Marion Barry's support that Gaston NEAL was able to get a job at the D.C. Health Department during the height of the HIV epidemic, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I remember this was back in the 80s, and Nina Simone was having some challenges, mental health challenges. She left Mary Baracus in Newark and was Gaston saw her wandering. I'm sorry to tell this story because I know we still love Nina Simone, but she was wandering the street and having some challenges. Gaston went to Marion Barry, and Marion Barry made sure that Nina Simone had a safe, comfortable place to be as she was dealing with her mental health challenges. So many, many stories about Gaston NEAL. Who wants to jump in? Do we want to jump in with a poem?
Peter Harris.
Brian, what?
Yeah,
okay, Peter. Let's get Peter.
Harris.
Peter Harris, again, a native Washingtonian. I had the blessing to hear him together with Brian do a very special poetry reading a week ago Sunday, and listeners, you're going to have the treat of hearing them again. So, Peter, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are.
Well,
as a poet.
I'm just trying to write a good sentence, especially when I sit with these two geniuses. But I didn't know Mr. NEAL, but I do know that the era, and I know that the guiding ethics and principles, whether you were in the university setting or the community setting, was service and connecting, and also seeing the whole picture. So that at one moment you are doing electoral stuff, next moment you over in the hood trying to make sure you break circuits in people's lives. So I think that for me as a person now nearing 70 and who has absorbed what I consider the core principles of so much of that social work and social justice work, and even what I call social justice tenderness, is people were saying to each other, we love you, we need you, we need you to stand for something bigger than the worst case scenarios that are bedeviling you. I mean, even if you're talking about three folks who are meeting in a mental institution, but yet saying, well, wait a minute, we'll get our meds, we'll get all together, but we're going to really think big about being cultural workers. That's the tradition out of which I come. I'm more technically these days, I'm the director of something called the Black Man of Happiness Project. And I'm super, super interested in how can joy and happiness get very specific and be very specifically used by black men of witness and liberation, so that they can contribute to their families' lives, their own lives, the lives of our community. And as Gwendolyn Brooks used to write, first fight, then fiddle. And basically, I've come to the conclusion at this age that you fiddle while you fight, because it's really all the stuff we're talking about. In my way of interpreting it these days is, we're making beauty as we go along.
Right.
My mother used to say, "Pick up that trash over in Parklands," and I said, "Well, I didn't throw it down on the ground, Mom." And she said, "Well, you live here, don't you?
Right.
You live here, don't you?"
Right.
And that is the ethic that's driving so much of my cultural work. The poetry is my freedom, venue. That's where I go to sing my song without censorship. That's where I go to be my most imaginative self. So, you know what I mean? You can look up my work, blackmanofhappiness.com. And I'm here in D.C. this particular visit as a residency artist at the Nicholson Project, which is over on Nicholson Street in Southeast. And for another month, I'll be here thinking and writing and resting and researching, doing stuff like this. And then as part of that residency on June 11th, Kenny and Brian, Kenny's really genius son, Kenny Carroll III, and my friend and teacher out of Baltimore, Melvin E. Brown, we're going to come back to the American Poetry Museum, June 11th, 3 p.m., and we're going to do a group choral reading of 3 poems. Maybe we'll throw a lagniappe in there at the end, but we're going to honor Sterling A. Brown.
Yes.
And the project is called See You Comes by Tens. And, we don't even have to go much further than that, but we welcome folks to come on out. We don't quite know every bit of the arrangement for our chorus, but we're going to sing. And we're going to celebrate Mr. Brown and gathering up dudes. Come on by 10. Mr. Brown said that they got all the judges. They don't come by ones. They don't come by twos. They come by tens. And so one of the poems we'll be doing is, we can gather each other. We can gather each other by tens for work. And that's what it seems to me Mr. NEAL stood for, is let's gather each other, by tens, by 20s, because we do need the work that we need to do. Right. And we need to do the work that we need to do.
And June 11th, tell us, Peter, what day of the week is that?
It's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday. And what time again?
3 p.m.
And explain to people where the Poetry Museum is, because I had
That's a good question.
Yeah, so
I'll let y'all do that.
Yeah, so the American Poetry Museum is right at the Brooklyn Arts Walk, which is about 1 second from the Brooklyn Metro station on the Red Line.
Oh, thank you.
Just get off there, right off of Monroe Street. I think, directly off of Monroe Street, or you can come right up through the Brooklyn Metro station.
Absolutely. We'll repeat it again. I was very thankful to have gone there with Jewel the other Sunday. A wonderful place, and not too far from Busboys and Poets. Again, that is Sunday, June 11th, from what time?
3 to 6, and by the way, there's an exhibition up called See You Comes by Tens. We have a most marvelous photo of Stokely Carmichael sitting with an elder in Alabama in 1965 that we found in the Library of Congress. And that exhibition features that juxtaposed with the Declaration of Independence. And on the opposite wall, we have a gorgeous portrait by Roy Lewis from right here in D.C.
Good friend of Gaston.
That's beautiful. And we also have a beautiful portrait by Chester Higgins, Jr., the master from up in Brooklyn.
Yes.
It's very, very inspiring to go there, and you will see the spirit and feel the spirit of Gaston if you go there Sunday, June 11th. And I keep wanting to tell more stories, but who wants to jump in? We want to hear some of your poetry before we keep not just only talking.
Okay. Why don't we have Peter read something since he sort of set us up for some stuff. That would be beautiful. Yes, indeed.
First thing out my mouth, it don't even have to be words. rapture scatting, praise faces beaming, good in you, bending light in the room. Illuminate, do right, coursing in the bloodstream of people you meet or children you raise. Enunciate the first thing, like you a duet partner with Sarah Vaughan. Send in the clowns for real. Laughter scatters red joy. Baggy improvisation brightens eyes. Music faces merry-go-round. Like, what if the first thing sound like Muhammad Ali floating boasts on a summer cloud? Or what if the first thing sound like Sweet Honey blending out front of a militant hum? Or Malcolm pinpointing on a cushion of New Day Errol Garner? Or what if the first thing sound like Mother Wit guiding by the light of Ida B. Wells? Or you, yourself, being to the core of daylight in your baby's eyes? What's the sound of the second thing, third thing, if the first thing out my mouth wear on the ear with proof of an original tongue? What is the movement that follow when you've been touched by electric confidence, when you've been told ever so sincerely, day to day, on a regular basis, without even one request for interpersonal refund, you are a miracle wrapped up in human flesh.
Yes,
Beautiful.
yes.
That's definitely in the spirit of Gaston, Neal. That was Peter Harris. And again, you can hear him on June 11th. Who wants to go next? Kenny, you have, or Brian? Let's jump to Brian. Gilmore, again, we have 3 Native Washingtonians: Brian Gilmore, Kenny Carroll, Peter Harris, in the spirit of Gaston, Neal. Definitely. Oh, now people are going to want to call. I don't know. Should we take a caller? Let's
let Brian read.
Yeah, we're
going
to caller. Hold on, and then we'll get you on in a moment.
Okay, this is called Billy Eckstein. Comes to
From
Washington,
Pittsburgh.
D.C.
Yeah, from Pittsburgh.
Right.
And
My
this is-
father's favorite singer.
And this
My-
is
my
for
father's too.
this was dedicated for Gaston Neal. He strolled in with Amiri Baraka, decked out in a long, dark trench coat, Yasser Arafat's scarf, beret. Made me think of Dali, Black Panthers, only he wasn't no painter because he wasn't smiling like Romare Bearden, and he wasn't no panther, so I was told, but he was carrying poems, and the people were his politics. We all thought he might read a few, but he didn't. Wasn't time yet for mumbo sauce, please. Mumbo sauce, please. Dripping thick over deep fried chicken wings served without napkins. I met him years later. He told me about my city, how he was there on 14th Street when Murder One left junkies laid out in alleys with needles in arms, soaring like baseballs over Banneker playground fence. He told me he talked to Langston Hughes over the phone. Langston treated him like they had known each other for 49 years, like they had grown up together in Joplin, Missouri. Back in the day, he was there on U Street with Stokely when word came that the king was dead and the country would burn, break, crack, and wail. Sometimes I look at him, see my grandfather on the porch preaching about unions, or Willie LeLion Smith at the piano, reminding young upstarts that his fingers can still dance like chorus girls rehearsing for a show. Other times I look at him, my friends and I are sharing cold beer, bragging about dunking, reverse layups, pool games we no longer have time to play. I finally did hear his poetry. Now I know why Pennsylvania's steel towners need other neighborhoods to love. Down the lazy river to rebel with the rest, fight off the horse like Jack Johnson running from the Mann Act, shaking it loose from his body until the horse finds weaker souls. No more rides on the horse these days. This body ain't no amusement park. Pittsburgh headed to Washington, D.C. to write some songs. Like Billy Eckstein coming here, a second life is lived. but don't call this no Dickens tale.
Yeah, Brian Gilmore.
And can I have Peter and Brian do something? Peter, you just read from a book.
Are we going to see if we
Yeah, hold up. But this is important if we want. What book did you just read from, Peter?
He is so good at this.
I tell you, because y'all will not hype y'all stuff.
I read from a book called Bless the Ashes, which is published in 2014.
Mm-hmm. And
written
Brian,
by?
Oh, yeah. And
That's Peter's book.
that's all Peter's, yeah.
me.
And then Gilmore has.
And this was published in 2014 too. It was a good year. So this is We Didn't Know Any Gangsters.
Right. There you
and
go.
this is Cherry Castle Press.
Yes, sir.
Which is a local press. So.
Right, my brothers.
Nice.
And
He's
if you come
Kenny
June
is so generous. He is so good at this.
And if you come June 11th, you can buy some of their wonderful
That's
books.
right. That's right.
Absolutely, and it really is something not to be missed. I just want to also mention A.B. Spellman, who's of course part of the PFW family, and someday you may see a book of A.B. Spellman with all of Gaston's poems.
That's right.
So if we had more time, we would have had many more people on. Let's see if we can have a very quick call, hear from the caller. Caller, your name and your comment.
My name is James E. Ingram.
Welcome, James.
Welcome. Great show. I just happened to turn on the radio and I caught your comments there about Gaston NEAL. Well, I'm calling in to let you know I used to work with Gaston NEAL in Georgetown in 1965.
Wow.
Gaston NEAL and I worked for a company called the Door Store. And Gaston NEAL was a very, very creative person in restoring and refinishing furniture.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know that.
No.
He was very, very strong. We worked together for, at least 4 years there.
Wow.
That's a great
That's something
great
I did not
story.
know.
Yeah, even I didn't know that.
Right.
And we have another caller. Unfortunately, we probably needed another hour. Okay, caller, thank you. Let's see who we have next. Caller, you're on the air real quick. Give us your name and your comment. Speak up.
Talk to me.
Okay, you're listening. This is a special hour tribute to Gaston NEAL. And if the caller doesn't speak up, I'm going to just tell.
Can you hear me, Joni?
Yes. Welcome.
This is Keith. This is Keith.
Keith. You don't mean the Keith. Keith.
This is Keith NEAL. Yes, Joni.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
How you been doing?
Okay, you're going to have me in tears. So you share with us who you are, Keith. Keith NEAL.
It's been many years. It's been many years, Joni.
I'm so glad you're listening. Tell us something about your dad.
Oh, man, that's too much. That's
right. I know, Keith.
It's too much. But
absolutely. But you know what he used to always remind me of? He used to always say, "Come on, son, you got to get in the struggle."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would say, "Dad, I am in the struggle."
Right.
And he would say, and we would debate what the struggle was.
Right.
The struggle for him was to try to do right for black folks, which we understood. And the struggle for me is to help to get the message preached to everyone.
Right.
That there's a better day coming.
Right.
But we had a nice debate on just those things. But my dad was a thinker. He always had me thinking.
Right.
Before I could offer him any information, this is what he was asking me. He'd look at me and say, "Son, did you read it?" Man, did you read it? I go, "No." Okay. Well, how you offer me something?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
He was a reader.
Yeah.
Fact, he educated me on one of the artists like Sidney Porter. He said, you know, son, he didn't have a high school education. You know, he read everything. And I would go, now how does he know all this?
Right.
Because he read.
He did. He's a voracious reader, Gaston was.
He was. And Keith, you grew up in Pittsburgh, and then you lived quite a while here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Are you the second son?
I am the second son.
Just like that song,
my
Second
older brother passed,
Yes.
Yeah, my older brother passed,
Yes.
so.
Well, I'm very...
But he has another son also in Pittsburgh.
Yes, he does.
Eric.
Yes,
okay.
Eric.
Yeah.
And he has, I think he has 7 children in all. And
yes, he does.
Some of them are right here in D.C.
Absolutely.
Keith, I wish you were right here with us in the studio.
Yeah, thanks for calling, Keith.
Absolutely. No. And by the way, I used to engineer his show called Scatter Pieces of
Scatter
Action.
Pieces,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Scatter Pieces.
So
Action.
Scattered Pieces. That was quite
I
a
had
show.
my license there. Yeah,
Wow.
I had my license there, FCC license. I would engineer his show, and one time he came in late, and the producer said, "Well, you're going to go." I said, "I'm going to go on." And so I went on for about 20 minutes, nervous as a
Wow.
kid.
Yes, Gaston would be
And playing
scattering
music. I
around
was
with
so
that show.
glad.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad you called, brother.
Keith,
That's
and maybe
beautiful.
Leave your number with the engineer. We could
Okay.
catch up with you. Thank you so much, Keith. And I'm just
Thank
going
you,
to
Joni.
squeeze
No,
in.
go right ahead.
I'm going to
Go right
squeeze in
ahead.
two little stories as fast as I can. Scattered Pieces of the Dream also reminds me that Gaston in the early 90s, thanks to Marion Barry, got a job with the health department with Dr. Reed Tuckson. And Gaston was very instrumental, and some of you who don't know Gaston don't know that he had a deep issue with substance abuse. Reed encouraged him to take his wisdom, and I remember Gaston screaming out about this right in the beginning of the HIV epidemic, that something had to be done for the IV drug users in the alleyways, hidden away, that were getting HIV. So Gaston helped to create a program, which someday we could spend definitely an hour on that program. He had what he called the Jump Out Squad that would go into those alleys. But he also created a special play called Niecy's Dilemma. It was a one-woman play. We aired it with the help of Ron Clark, Calvin Rolark, and Tom Porter. And that is the only time that WPFW actually got a Golden Reel Award for that play. It was a one-act play, a sister talking about trying to get her man to use protection, a condom, and so then she went to the audience asking them what they would do. So that's one very one thing that Gaston did with the help of PFW, Calvin Rolark, and Ron Clark. Through his direct experience, he saved many lives. And I just want to also quickly mention that Reed Tuckson, together with Gaston NEAL, Gaston went up to Reed and had this idea. He wanted to form something called the Listening Group. And that was a group of black men that got together in each other's homes.
The Jazz Listening Group.
The Jazz Listening Group that is still going strong. That's that. And I had a woman, a kind of famous woman cardiologist, who said that was really a health initiative. That's right. A mental health initiative. So Gaston NEAL, thank you for the listening group. So, okay, Kenny, help me out. Who wants to go
Kenny
next?
got to read. We got to hear.
Yeah, so I'll read a piece. So this is Brian and Peter got numerous books. I'm waiting for my second book to come out. This is the title and the title poem. This is called The Jim Crow Drowning of Kenneth Carroll for Uncle Kenny. And I'll just read a little bit of the epigraph. Because they were barred from public schools, many African-American children never learned to swim. Between 1945 and 1948, 37 school-aged boys drowned in the city. 37 black school-aged boys drowned in the city. At Rosedale Playground in Kingman Park, the 1952 drowning of a teenager who had climbed a fence to swim sparked pickets and direct action by residents, leading the Department of Recreation to desegregate Rosedale Pool that fall. Because of these protesters, all of D.C.'s recreation facilities would be desegregated by 1954. That teenager was my uncle and namesake, Kenneth Carroll. 1. Freshed up, you country boy, Croon, Maryland, Patuxent River, hauler of water, farmhand, sharecropper's grandson. Tobacco and pig guts haunt the breeze. Grandpa digs, former slave, but drive you like sane. For the white man who spends his days at the racetrack, the privilege of slavery's residue. 22 miles between the back of this mule and D.C., between this plow, this field, and tales of colored neighborhoods called Kingman, a sparkling diamond, your mother's new home, a light, The deed reads Mary Ellen Carroll, 1653 Kramer Street, Northeast. 2. You in D.C., its sweltering heat make a farm boy ignore Jim Crow squawking. The audacity of segregation, a gleaming new playground built in a colored neighborhood for whites only. No signs needed, just tradition, a watchman instead of a lifeguard. 3. Your face above grandma's mantle, smiling cherubic, Sam Cookish, suit and tie, 14 and cocky as Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi in 1955. But it is 1952, and you know emancipation as basement and front porch, Negro parents with government jobs, pretty black girls, your daddy's sedan, reunited near the murky Anacostia. 4. Ain't no white folks about to keep me out that new pool, you laugh. You thinking that shimmering water and the gleeful splashing and laughing of white kids is supposed to be your joy, too. How was you, born black and beautiful, supposed to just accept this outrage, the obscenity asserting inferiority? So you plotted. Your home a stone's throw from the swimming pool, trunks under your jeans. Mama thinks you are in the basement. Harry now, my laughing namesake. 5. You climb 2 fences tall as segregations lie. You faster than your friend Clarence. The surface like diamonds, like the city in the dark. Reflected streetlights remind you of waves. You rise up at pool's edge, hurl yourself in the air, anticipate the embrace of cool. Suspended in merriment, the splash can be heard in the tobacco barns of Croom Station. 6. My daddy, your brother, begged the watchman to save you. Your body an anchor in 7 feet of water. Save him yourself, the crow called. The obsidian waters would not release this embrace. Noun a tune. Lungs chlorinated and full. The watchman knew you must be made to pay for this affront, this bold assertion of equality. 7. 7 years later, I am Christian with your name. Your smile adorns grandma's mantle, an altar shared with Jesus, soon joined by martyrs John, Martin, and Robert. I stare into your face, and no one will explain how your name closes mouths and lowers eyes. Your absence is described as the accident, a tenebrous trauma as enigmatic as God's will. But I have come, 7 years after Jim Crow, held you under that water, punishment for escaping the plow and burdens of your granddaddy's enslaver. I have come to recitate your name. I have come, Uncle Kenny, Kenneth Francis Carroll, saint of D.C. segregation. I have come to save you myself.
That's right. Ooh, that's
wow. Kenny Carroll, where can we get your books?
It ain't out yet.
Not out yet. And are you going to be there with us, with Brian and
yes,
Peter
I'll be there
June
with these
11th.
brothers. Yes, sir.
And with his son.
Yeah, and with young
That's
Kenny
right.
Francis III.
We're going to be DNA and up and down the line.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes,
and
indeed.
We're almost out of time. We may have time for one more.
Well, do we want to hear? So, my man Kalia has Gaston NEAL lined up, poem about 30 seconds.
Okay, before we go to that, I want to make sure I get in some key points we heard in the beginning, which I didn't have a chance to announce. To the North Star with Gaston NEAL and Fred Foss. Fred Foss from, he and I went to high school together in New York City.
Fred Foss.
But that is definitely a powerful piece
definitely
to say
get that. That's available.
Lightly, you can get it very easily on YouTube. Gaston NEAL and Fred Foss, To the North Star.
Yes.
I also want to say real quick that you can listen to the rest of our programming today. The next hero we're talking about is Tina Turner from noon to 2. Is Ida Campbell presents Tina Turner and Domestic Violence. 2 to 4, Andrea Thompson with Sophie's Parlor, tributing Tina through the voices of other artists. 4 to 6, Katia, the Turner Black Woman, Rocker and Loving Kindness. And 4 to 6, Tina Turner live from Wembley Stadium. And with that said, we are maybe going to have time for our last piece from Gaston Neal. Let's see.
Hit that Mr. Miller for me, Khalid.
Mr. Miller.
And
Mr. Miller taught me music. Mr. Miller had a paddle that sucked your ass into little holes. Mr. Miller wrote symphonies, movements, and concertos. Mr. Miller wove musical spells, taught rhythms, allowing waterfalls of sound to lift you from your splintered chair. Mr. Miller was 4'7", with eyes that twinked and hands that held that paddle that sucked asses. Mr. Miller would play the flight of the bumblebee, and the keys disappear, and the room is silence, and blazing light descends on time itself, bursting school walls, crying the suspensions of belief. For 1,000 make-believe hours, we became a monstrous moving rhythm right there in the classroom, Mr. Miller's classroom. The 4-foot man dreamed of his symphonies, his concertos, his movements. Mr. Miller had pain and softness in his eyes. Mr. Miller kept that paddle behind his back. Mr. Miller's paddle sucked thousands of asses, even mine. They ignored Mr. Miller's concerto, Mr. Miller's symphony, Mr. Miller's movement. Long after time, long after movement, long after rhythm, and long after the prime of his life, Mr. Miller's concerto, Mr. Miller's movement, Mr. Miller's symphony was played. In the hall with the marble steps, with the women in jewels and the men in hats, and Mr. Miller in tears. Mr. Miller, the 4-foot man with the paddle that sucked 1,000 asses, took my young brain and made music.
yeah.
That was Brian you hear laughing in the background.
Our
That was when
hometown
we were
hero.
here at Grace Cavalier Show.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, one more time, you can hear these fabulous poets who are in the spirit, definitely of Gaston Neal. Gaston Neal's spirit is still here with us at WPFW. So tell us one more time what is happening, Peter, on Sunday, June 11th.
Well, 5 poets will honor Sterling Brown, and the exhibition honor read Greg Tate. And we will be reading Sterling Brown's Old Limb and 2 of my original poems. And we will be blending our voices to celebrate both Mr. Brown's big vision and critique of American racism and structural racism. And also, my poems are direct descendants, if you will, of his poem. And we'll be blending our voices, me, Kenny, and his son, Brian, and Melvin E. Brown.
And again, that's at the American Museum.
American Poetry Museum.
From what time?
3 p.m. to about 5, I guess.
American Poetry Museum, which is right there next to the Brooklyn Metro Station. And we are almost out of time. I wanted to lift up another poet who's definitely in the spirit with us today as well, and that is Askia Muhammad.